Hello, my people. Welcome back to Unit 3, Sensation and Perception. So we just finished with bio of the brain and sleep, and now we're going to learn about how we take in the world around us and how we sense it and how we perceive it and how it's different for every person. So what is the difference between sensation and perception, right? So sensation is the detection of environmental stimuli such as sound, objects, and smell. So it's what you detect. It's me smelling my coffee in the morning. It's observing the stimuli around me with my eyes, right? So again, it's our taking in what we see. And perception is how we interpret it. Okay, so it's how we interpret it. So perception is the experience of detecting those environmental stimuli. It refers to how our brain organizes and interprets the sound, objects, and smells. So for example, I might walk into a house that smells like oatmeal cookies, right? And that's my sensation. But my perception of oatmeal cookies could be, oh, it reminds me of grandma's house, right? So I'm using my own experiences of what I smell to interpret what I'm smelling and connecting it to other things. So again, sensation is the actual detection of the environment stimuli around us, so anything that triggers our environment. And then perception is how we perceive, how we connect what we're seeing to our past experiences and grow on them. So again, we have sensation and perception. Those are the celebrities of our unit, okay? So when you look at this, the first thing I want you to think of is, what did you see on the slide? Did you see anything other than what was there? Okay, and this is usually done in class. So sensation is the data coming in. And so for example, I see rocks, I see water, I see green, I see branches. But did anyone see faces? Because there's hidden faces in here, and that is perception. So that is when you take around what you're looking at the environmental stimuli and making connections from it. We are pre-programmed to find faces, which we'll talk about in a later unit. But the perception is how we make sense of the data. So real quick, if we go back, there's faces hidden behind here, right? And while our sensations are taking in, like on the sensation side, we're taking in the basics. Our perceptions are which is what is putting things together for us. That's where we see the faces. Okay, next step. So now we have two types of processing. So in your notes, two types of processing. We have bottom up, and then we will have top down. So bottom up is where our sensory receptors relay information to the brain and we interpret the information. So think of bottom up processing as the basics. So a way to understand this is when you're learning anything new in a class. So psychology, you're learning the basics of the brain. Okay, so you're like, okay, a neuron does this, something does this, right? And you're making sense of the little things to start connecting them to make them into a bigger thing. And that is where we go from bottom up, which is basics up, to top down, which top down, I always think of top down because it starts with our experiences first. It starts with our brain first. So top down processing is where we use previously experienced and expectations of the information to make sense of them. And this is how visual illusions work, okay? So when we have bottom up processing, say that we're learning about Nancy, right? So we're learning about all our different parts, right? Once we know the basics, once we know something enough, we're going to start learning more about Nancy from top down. So now that we know the basics, now we can connect that, oh, Nancy is how the neurotransmitters fly through the axon. That's top down processing. You're using past experiences or information you already know to make more connections. Okay, so think of bottom up processing as the basics. So you saw the water, you saw the rocks, you saw the people on the horses in the picture, but the top down processing is interpretation down. It's where you're like, oh, I see faces because I see this and this connects to this. So as you learn more psychology or any topic, you start with bottom up processing until you start making the connections from different chapters. And that's when you're starting to use top down processing, where you're interpreting first and using your past experiences to make connections. Okay. All right. So again, we have our two types of processing, and this is what we were going to do. So bottom up, so this is a great example, right? When you look at these jelly beans, right, you can either look at the flavors to be like, oh, so like say you didn't know anything about jelly beans, right? And you taste the flavors and you start to learn what each flavor is like, right? So bottom up, right? Top down is where you would pick out your favorite colors because your past experiences told you you like the red, you like the purple, right? So these are two ways of looking at jelly beans. Bottom up processing would be, okay, there's many colors, there's different types. Top down would be either you picking out your favorite because you already know what your favorites are, or you can say, oh, this reminds me of grandma's house when she would always have, jelly beans on our table. That is top down, as you're using your past experiences to make connections, okay? So psychophysics, it is a vocab term, and psychophysics is essentially methods that measure the strength of a stimulus on our sensitivity. So essentially it's like, if you've ever had like an eye test and they do they try to see how far you can see in your vision or what you can pick up, they're looking at how sensitive your eyes are to how much they can pick up stimulus or stimuli around you. Okay, so psychophysics is all about testing someone's sensitivity to the stimuli around them. Okay. And I know this picture is really creepy, but I always enjoy showing you because everyone's like, whoa, what's happening? So the absolute threshold is another vocab, and it's the minimum stimulus necessary to detect a stimulus half the time. So what it's saying is that as the grandchild is, I think that's his grandchild, who knows, as they like brush against his cheek, only about half the time will he notice the feather, right? So that's absolute threshold is about, you're going to detect the stimulus about half the amount of time. So that's your absolute threshold, okay? And when we think about thresholds, there's this vocab that's different, difference threshold, just noticeable difference. So it's called J&D. I call it J&D. And when we think about, so if you're a musician, minimal change in stimulus that can be barely just detected, so just noticeable. So if you've ever tuned a guitar, we are able to see just a noticeable difference in the tuning, so we can tune our guitar, right? So again, if the difference threshold is the just noticeable difference because we are able to hear the slight difference or see the slight difference in something, which will allow us to detect it, okay? And this leads us to Weber's law, which I will get out of the screen. So Weber's law, for a difference to be, to be able to be perceived, two stimuli, they have to constantly differ rather than for an amount in time, they have to constantly differ. So what this means is that if you're strumming a guitar and you're trying to tune it, the airwaves are going to constantly be different, so it allows you to pick up on it. It can't be just for a slight second that it's different. You may not pick up on it. It has to be a constant difference in order for us to pick up on it, okay? So for example, it could be our vision too. So which red box is darker than the other two? I would have you guys stare at it for a long time. And there's just a noticeable difference, and it is the far right box. So again, something else you would have done in class. Also, I wanted to talk about sensory adaptation. So originally in the beginning of class, I would have you guys switch your watch to the other hand, put a book on your lap, put your phone in your pocket, and over time, we forget that it's there because we have the ability to sensory adapt, okay? And what that means, it's one of the best things us humans can do. It diminishes the sensitivity to an unchanging stimulus. So if you put your phone in your back pocket, after a while, you're going to forget about it because you no longer need to feel it there, so you're able to tune it out. So something that's really creepy is that we have the ability to tune things out. So if I told you right now, oh, how does your hair feel against your neck? All of a sudden, you're going to start feeling your hair on your neck, and you're like, whoa, right? Or I can say, how do your pants feel, right? And you're going to start feeling your pants on your body, right? Because you have the ability to forget about it. So people who fall on the spectrum, the autistic spectrum, they have a hard time with sensory adaptation. That's why clothing, so certain cloth makes them irritable, because people who are on the spectrum have a hard time with sensory adaptation is they always feel things. So it's hard for them to like forget about this uncomfy shirt that they're wearing. And that's why people who are on the spectrum like tend to like softer clothes because it's less irritable on the skin because it will annoy them, right? So again, benefits, freedom to focus on, specific changes in your background. You guys have the ability to focus in on me lecturing instead of hearing people behind you chatting. We perceive the world not as it actually is, but what it's useful for us to perceive it. So the way that we perceive the world is biased to our own experiences, right? So again, for the last little part of our beginning intro on sensation and perception, we have the subliminal stimulation. So essentially, when our stimuli are below a certain threshold, we do not feel it. So if it's right around here, if it's hovering right below the graph, my example is this: it's like mosquitoes. Okay, so if you have a mosquito bite, they must have landed on you under your subliminal threshold and bit you because you didn't feel it. It was under the threshold of what you could feel. So you got a bug bite. But if you find a mosquito and you feel it, it reached over your threshold and now you can see it and feel it, that's when you're gonna slap it, right? So again, we have this threshold of what we feel and what will bring it into conscious awareness, right? Okay, I hope you enjoyed the intro. Feel free to finish up your notes and we will get started with the next video.